So, good afternoon. Hello, welcome to today's CPD session, Differentiation in T-levels. If you haven't done so already done so, can I ask you to put something in the chat box? Let us know you can hear us, okay? You'll find the chat box at the bottom of the webinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We encourage questions from participants, and in these trying times especially, no question is a silly question. If we're not able to answer any of your questions today, we will follow them up afterwards with our NCFE colleagues, and all questions and answers included in the chat box today will be saved and shared with you after the session. Also, the session today is being recorded to enable colleagues to access it. So my name's Helen Scanlon. I'm one of the curriculum officers for T-levels. My colleague from the curriculum team also joining us today is Rachel Webster. Hello, Rachel, and thanks for your input today.
Hello.
So our role is to support centres through the planning, onboarding and CPD processes for NCFE cash qualifications, with a focus on promoting and advancing learning, whilst helping to create a fairer and more inclusive society. We're also joined today by Janet King, one of our T-level sector managers, and she's a subject specialist for education and childcare. Janet should be able to answer any subject-specific questions which are asked. Hello, Janet, and thanks again for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Helen and Rachel, and hello everybody. Good to be here.
Thanks, Janet. So the objectives of this afternoon session are to explore the needs of T-level students and how to use differentiation strategies to individualise learning, and also to examine planning strategies and also how to adapt teaching, learning and assessment in a responsive way. The session will explore differentiation strategies used in the education and childcare qualification and the challenges the qualification and the students bring, and allow you to share the best practice and your ideas. We'll use a breakout room for collaborative activities, and we've shared some resources in the materials section to provide some information and some extension activities. So the outline agenda for this afternoon is the session is going to be 1 hour in duration. We will include a range of activities and sharing of ideas and experiences. So to summarise, the session is being recorded and a link will be made available in the to the recording, in our YouTube channel. Any questions not answered today will be followed up with the relevant staff members after the event. Also, please remember that questions are encouraged. We ask that initially all sound settings are on mute to avoid background noise and feedback, but then you activate your microphone for the breakout room activity. A short evaluation will be deployed on completion of today's webinar, and we encourage you to complete the short survey to help us improve and develop our CPD offer. Okay, so we're going to start off this afternoon with a couple of polls. The answers provided will help us to adapt our input accordingly. The first question is this: which aspect of the T-level is the most challenging to differentiate effectively? If you're yet to start T-level delivery, please try and predict what you think it might be. So I'll put your choices on the screen now. You should be able to answer the questions that you can see. So if your choice isn't there, please choose other and put your answer into the chat box instead. So do you think differentiation is most difficult for the core content, the industry placement, English and maths development, wider skills and competencies, or something else? So we've got people voting. That's wonderful. Thank you. If you could just choose your preferred answer or choose other and pop your idea in the chat box instead. Well, that's nearly everybody voted. So thanks for that. I'll just give it another couple of seconds just to give everyone the opportunity. Okay, I'm going to close it now and share the results. So as you can see, the vast majority of participants feel it was the core content, so that's 67%. Some people thought industry placement and some people thought wider skills and competencies. Nobody's chosen other, so that's great. We've got probably the most prevalent ones there already. Thanks for that. Okay, we're going to dive in straight into another poll now. So poll 2. This relates to exploring the needs of the T-level students. So thinking about your students or your future students, if you're not in delivery yet, what is the most prevalent need in relation to how you differentiate your learning? As for the previous question, if you haven't started teaching the T-level yet, please try and predict what you think the answer is going to be. It'll be interesting to compare answers with those of the teachers who are already delivering the qualification, and I will ensure I will share this detail after the event. So the choices for this poll include their levels of motivation, confidence or engagement, their English and math skills, including literacies, academic literacies, their IT skills and access to resources, their work ethic and attitude and work experience, or their areas of strength and weakness, and their metacognition and their awareness of their learning abilities and strengths and weaknesses. You'll probably notice that student ability is not there as an option. This is because it's normally the first answer we receive when we ask about the factors related to differentiation, and we'd like you to think a bit differently about the subject today. Again, if your preferred answer is not there, please choose which one you think is the closest and then add extra comments in the chat box. Just going to give that a few more seconds to give everyone the opportunity to choose and or pop something in the chat box. Okay, thank you everybody. I'm going to close that again now and share the answers. As you'll be able to see, vast majority have chosen their areas of strength, weakness and their awareness of their abilities, which is really interesting. And some have said their levels of motivation and confidence. Thanks again for your input there. We will keep this in mind as we're going through the remainder of the webinar and talk about the areas that you've said are the most prevalent and most difficult and needed in differentiating learning. Okay, thank you. Before we go any further, we're going to briefly recap what we mean by differentiation. So firstly, it relates to working with groups of students. Even in small groups, the needs of the students will be very different. So we're going to focus on the content of this session on working with cohorts of students and adapting sessions and input in relation to individual student differences. With this in mind, it's therefore about teachers adapting their delivery and support practice in relation to their students' needs. Having a range of activities is always good practice, and links to preferred learning styles and allowing for the students to have the time and the structure to learn effectively as individuals. So the biggest impact on differentiation is when the teacher considers their students' needs, which we've already started to think about in direct relation to T levels. So considering the students' skills, knowledge and levels of progress and planning to meet their development needs is very important, but so are ad hoc and responsive activities. During a session when formative assessment gives the teacher an idea of how well the students are progressing, they can adapt their practice in real time to be responsive to this. But also how to record all of this. Planning a range of support and extension activities for specific students is one way to do this, but just as important are the informal annotations on lesson plans and schemes of work, and showing how learning is being adapted and therefore differentiated in direct relation to the students' progress and learning needs. Something teachers sometimes overlook or take for granted are the English, maths and digital skills needed to complete activities. GCSE grades don't always guarantee skills and knowledge, and the students can have areas of strengths or gaps in their knowledge or lower levels of confidence in some of these areas. It's worth considering them when planning differentiated learning. Okay, so now we're going to focus more closely on the education and childcare T level and explore what factors might impact on a teacher's differentiation practice. Firstly, the levels of student motivation and engagement. Talking to delivery staff, it's apparent that these do differ. Whilst the majority of students have extremely high levels of motivation and engagement, some are lower. And both of these will be a challenge in their own way. Teachers will need to use a range of strategies to successfully deal with them. Also, the individual personal expectations and confidence levels of the students will need to be taken into consideration. Teachers will also have the added challenges of remote learning too, which leads us on to the support available, especially at home. Evaluations of the support that can be offered to T-level students in lockdown are taking place, and remember to identify and record these. The students' IT skills and access to resources. This is something I'm going to bring in an expert on, and Rachel will be talking about this in more detail shortly. Students' English, maths and skills and attitudes, linking back to the GCSE grades from the last year, and of course the students' attitudes towards how important these are to their T-level success, which also brings us to academic literacies and the challenges Level 3 work brings. Individual levels of progress, thinking about how aware the students are of their progress, how motivated they are to push themselves, and what their individual hooks are. And in this, I mean the type of approach teachers need to take to motivate and encourage them to improve. And as this came up in the previous poll as being quite important, very much about individualising how you motivate and engage the students. Moving on to the students' ability to cope and their levels of resilience, something extremely important in the current climate. Teachers may need to consider which students would need further reassurance and/or support to keep going. The work ethic and work experience, something really important in relation to the industry placement. Teachers should consider how strong the students' abilities and competencies are in relation to being work ready and adapt their input to highlight areas of the core content which some students need more or less input on. So the differences in the circumstances of the student in the cohort, for example, relationships between the students in the group and who works best with who, etc. These can also rapidly change with teenagers, so being mindful of these and facilitating activities which develop the students' core working abilities and managing the relationships may need to be differentiated. The students' problem-solving skills and abilities will also impact on teachers' planning for differentiation. It might be that the problem-solving skills of some students need to be developed via different teaching and learning approaches. The students' awareness of their areas of strengths and weakness, so this is an area of importance from the earlier poll. This will impact on a teacher's practice. Think about the students who need to be more reflective, will benefit from improving their awareness of their levels of progress and priorities for development. The students' preferred learning styles, and although we know this is an area which could be contested, it's something that they should be aware of for their own learning and also to apply learning theory into practice in an industry context. The students' prior learning experience will have an impact on their ability to engage with the learning experience we provide for them. They are human, and if they've had a negative experience in the past, they will bring that to our learning contexts. Any LDD or SEN requirements, although this is probably an easier area due to formal support plans and professional input and guidance. The students' finances, there'll be a range due to different backgrounds and personal circumstances. This might be extra relevant in the current situation we're in due to the lockdown and the economic pressures that is bringing to families across the country. And finally, the time of year or day, etc. For teenagers, how they manage at different times and how this impacts on their ability to focus on learning is something teachers could consider when planning for individualised learning. Okay, so now we're going to look more closely at the T-level components and make some suggestions for the approaches and activities teachers could consider and use. Janet, Rachel and I will join together to take you through this next slide. So Janet's going to start talking about the core content.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. So if we think about the core content, there is familiar content here held within the new T-level for education and childcare, but there's also new content, such as the scope widening to include 0 to 19 years, further learning around pedagogy, curricula and theory. Formative assessment, much more critical now to allow for knowledge checks to support confidence of students, talking about the confidence and the motivation and the engagement, very important to to have the time to reflect, the time for self-assessment, the time for learners to build and engage with motivation through applying metacognition strategies, for example. And of course, the exams and the employer set project uses differentiation through the types of questions that are asked. So the idea of recall, the idea of applying knowledge, and building up to some more open-ended questions. And those are the sorts of strategies that could be used as, within your teaching and learning, and I'm sure are used within teaching and learning, but often without thinking that you're differentiating. So asking questions to students where you know that you're sort of testing something new. It might be more of a sort of closed question, or one that is asking for recall, and then you're building on that and you're exploring things through a discussion and more open-ended techniques. So there is definitely room for differentiation at all levels across the core of the T level, in terms of teaching, in terms of learning, and also you'll find it in the assessment, and strategies that we can use when delivering the content will support students as they gain confidence towards that external assessment. Thank you, Helen.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about academic level and expectations. As I mentioned on the previous slide, this could be quite a big step up for some T-level students. Teachers may need to consider which students need support to carry out research independently, be able to read exam questions correctly and write an academic response to them. It might also be that there's a need to have a specific teaching and learning activity related to identifying what academic reading and writing is, how to write for different audiences and from different perspectives, for example, third and first person, and exploring the tone and type of language used in higher or academic studies. I'm also going to talk about the assessment, so the exams and the employer set project. For many education childcare students and teachers, the move to these different forms of assessment might be something which needs to be factored into differentiated learning activities. Revising, preparing for exams, and being able to apply the theoretical knowledge they've gained in the project might need to be considered, and different types of support, guidance and learning activities provided for individuals who might need help to create a revision timetable, for example, which students might need writing frames to help them get started responding to an extended answer exam question. How could students be paired or grouped to allow for peer learning and support? Teachers could also consider which students have these skills already, and they might need to have appropriate extension activities planned for them as well. Janet's going to talk to us about industry placement.
Thank you. I think when we're in this situation that we are now, when we think about COVID and so on, the importance of actually recognising work-related skills and applying theory to practice becomes even more prevalent, I think. In the past, we may have had students, not necessarily on the T levels, but students who are feeding into a level 3 programme, who've had that wealth of experience at level 2. And indeed, we could have had students that are coming into a T level, either from level 2, or they may have had some year 10 experience, some taster experience working within the sector. I think it's been a very different and a very challenging time. So being able to gain those work-related skills, being able to apply theory to practice is probably even more challenging for you and for your students. And also we've got a setting, we're going into early years and sort of primary schools and beyond, those settings that have been challenged by COVID. And bringing in students into that is going to be it's a very difficult and challenging time. So I think the needs of the students is very important. As much preparation that you can do in terms of applying that theory to practice whenever you can, through simulation in the classroom, through role play, through scenarios and case studies and so on, really going to help to be able to explore those areas. And there will be some students, excuse me, there will be some students that are absolutely excited about going into placement and absolutely up for it and ready. As we all know, there'll also be students that are going to find this a massive leap in terms of their development. And it's making sure that those students are as ready as they can be and are as supported as they can be in this challenging time. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So moving on to the wider skills and competencies, I'm going to talk about English and maths. We do need to consider the skills needed to be successful by the students on the T-level programme, but also how the students are going to be expected to support development of the skills of the children they're working with in the placement. As these skills are vital to the success of every student and employee, promotion of the development of them is deemed best practice, and some students will need more support than others. Having starter or re-energising activities planned in for all students is good practice, but I would also suggest getting support from your subject specialist colleagues from English and Maths to allow you to be the most effective. Janet's now going to say something about industry-specific skills.
Thank you. And I think it's probably obvious to say that there are opportunities, more likely to be opportunities for English and digital application, less so perhaps than maths, but students need to feel confident in their understanding of the sector. For example, what children and young people are expected to attain in the framework and across curricula in English and maths, for example. And remembering the potential teacher-assessed grades that students will have gone through this time, and the role of formative assessment is heightened again here. So I think being mindful that English and maths at grade 4 and above may well be a teacher-assessed grade and is more than likely to be one that's teacher-assessed. Functional skills at level 2 if a student's working towards those, and being mindful of the confidence levels of students when they are sort of going into that world of work, when they're thinking about how they apply all of this knowledge, and monitoring that and make sure that their needs are met. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Now Rachel's going to take us through the digital section.
Thank you. For digital skills, you may need to consider the differences in the students' skills and knowledge due to their prior attainment. Some students will be more confident and knowledgeable than others due to personal experiences, as some students may have digital technology in their homes and use them daily, and other students may have access to very little or no technology at all. A centre informed me of a student who had been asked in their placement to create a leaflet. Would your students know the best software to use for this task? Could they navigate the ribbon and select the correct formatting tools, or even insert and edit images? Having digital activities planned is good practice for your support in supporting your students. The current situation with COVID, it's highlighted problems with technology within society, or the lack of it in some cases. The Department for Education have guidance on how schools, 16 to 19 academies, colleges, and further education institutions can access digital devices for pupils and students learning remotely, offering more support to disadvantaged students in further education. You can find additional information within the materials section of this webinar. Thank you, and I think Janet will talk about communication.
Thank you, that's great. So opportunities to use communication should be embedded in all aspects and will be sort of drawn in through those core skills that you'll find identified in the schemes of work, for example. Students will be involved in active listening. They'll be speaking, they'll be communicating with each other and at all levels. Links to the core skills are integral to all aspects of content delivery and also in all activities and experiences that are offered. But we've talked a lot about confidence levels today. We've talked a lot about motivation and engagement. And you will find, as you know, that students will have various different levels of engagement and motivation and communication in order to contribute, participate, as part of a discussion is really important. I think when we think about the Employer Set project, there's elements on that are looking at discussion, that are you know, really striving towards that communication, and communication within the workplace with young children and also with adults is key to an effective engagement with the T-level. So it's important just to monitor that and to try to bring out as many opportunities as you can within the normal teaching practices to allow students to feel more confident with their communication skills. Thank you.
Okay, back to me for employability and progression. It might be useful for some students to be supported to reflect on their skills and explore the softer skills and competencies they need to develop or improve. The awareness of this type of employability skill needed in industry might not be highly developed in the 16, 17-year-olds we're working with. And also some students may require more input and guidance than others in relation to their most appropriate progression route. Teachers might need to adapt their input and approach to support development of students' awareness and acceptance of the realities of their future options, which also leads us into reflection and awareness of the development needs, and also the reflective practice. Although a reflective practice is at the core of one of the in the industry and something we've already talked about, it's probably going to be an important factor to consider when planning your differentiated activities. Janice is going to talk about the preparing for specialisms in year 2 here now.
Thank you. I think when we think about the student, and you know, we've already touched on the importance of that confident student going into the classroom in the assisting teaching occupational specialism, going into the world of work in an early years setting and engaging with that workforce, the confidence levels to be able to do that effectively develop over time. And I think with the implications of COVID for a lot of centres that are Wave 1 providers now on this pilot, and indeed anybody on a level 2 or a level 3 programme in this subject area will be able to sort of empathise with the fact that the luxury of developing those skills over time has really been taken away from students. So what we might take for granted in terms of that confidence level with things like engaging with children and young people, in terms of communicating confidently and freely, all of those things develop over time. So it's been difficult, and I think we just need to be mindful of the individual needs of students, which I know you always are, but also in terms of expectations for the role and making sure that wherever we can, we're backing up the industry expectation with classroom activity to prepare that student as much as we possibly can, so that when they do have, albeit limited time, fingers crossed that things improve of course, but albeit limited time within that placement, they can hit the ground running, they feel as confident and as prepared as they possibly can be. And yeah, I think it's just about backing up those skills whenever we can through differentiated activities, open-ended questioning, really helping students to feel confident in discussion and taking part in communication, for example, which is key to a lot of things that happen in this sector area. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, lovely. I have said other informed by the chat box. If you've got any other ideas or any other aspects of the T-level qualification that you feel is important or difficult to differentiate, please pop it in the chat box and we can talk about it when we come back, because we're now going to move into the breakout rooms. This is going to allow you to explore what we've said already about differentiation in T-levels in more detail. The question we'd like you to explore is, how do you or could you differentiate the teaching and learning activities related to the different components of the T-level programme? Janet, Rachel and I were going to be in the different rooms to facilitate discussion, and there will be a document for completion to record your ideas and experiences. And that question I've just read out there will be in the form as well. The template can also be found in the materials section of this webinar. Once in your rooms, please, can you take your microphone off mute to allow you to add your questions and ideas and participate in the breakout room discussion. So if you just bear with me a minute, I'm going to sort out the breakout room members. It'll take me a minute or two.